My beloved child, before you move another inch, sit down and listen closely, because what is unfolding is not meant to frighten you, it is meant to prepare your heart for a truth you have sensed but could never fully explain. Something has been shifting behind the scenes of your life, quietly rearranging circumstances you thought were permanent. And tonight, the first sign of that change is closer than you realize. For days, perhaps even weeks, you have felt an unusual weight in the air. Not sadness exactly. Not fear. More like the strange silence that fills a room just before someone speaks words that cannot be taken back. You have noticed small things, a conversation that ended too quickly, a name appearing when you were trying not to think about it, a sudden memory arriving with such clarity that it felt less like remembering and more like being summoned. But why now? Why would the past begin knocking when you had finally learned how to live without an answer? In this fictional spiritual story, imagine a watchman standing alone beneath a dark blue sky, looking toward a horizon where the first line of gold has begun to appear. He has spent years studying storms, learning the language of wind, and recognizing the difference between destruction and transformation. Tonight, he sees something unexpected, not a storm moving toward you, but a door opening where there was once only a wall. The message connected to Amir Tsarfati's name in this title is not presented as a real prophecy or divine warning. Instead, his image becomes part of the story, a symbol of someone who notices patterns others overlook, someone who understands that preparation is not panic. And the pattern forming around you is deeply personal. A decision has already been made by someone whose silence affected you more than you ever admitted. That person has been carrying words they were afraid to speak. They believed distance would make the truth smaller. They thought time would erase the moment when everything changed between you. But time did the opposite. It stripped away excuses. It exposed what was real. And now, in the quietest hour, they have finally admitted something to themselves: losing contact with you did not bring peace. It revealed the depth of what they had buried. Picture them sitting near a window while rain moves softly against the glass. A phone rests in their hand, its screen glowing in the dim room. Your name is there. Their thumb hovers over it, then pulls away. They whisper, "What if I waited too long?" But that is not the real question haunting them. The real question is whether you will recognize the person they have become after everything that happened. Stay with this, because the emotional shift begins here. The reason you are going to need to sit down is not because something terrible is approaching. It is because the story you believed was finished may have been unfolding in secret. While you were learning to survive without closure, someone else was being forced to confront the consequences of leaving you without it. And there is another layer you have not seen. A conversation took place recently. Your name was mentioned unexpectedly. At first, the person tried to remain calm. They gave a short answer, changed the subject, and pretended the sound of your name had not shaken something awake inside them. But someone in the room noticed. They leaned forward and asked, "Why do you still look like that when people talk about them?" The silence that followed became the turning point. Because for the first time, the person did not deny it. They did not laugh. They did not hide behind timing, circumstances, pride, or responsibility. They lowered their eyes and said, "Because I never stopped wondering what would have happened if I had been brave." Those words opened a door they can no longer close. Since that conversation, they have been making a plan, not an impulsive gesture, not a dramatic promise, but a deliberate decision that could change the direction of both your lives. They know they cannot return with vague explanations. They know you deserve truth, accountability, and proof that their intentions are different now. But before they come forward, something must happen inside you. You must decide whether the version of yourself that waited for answers is still in control, or whether the stronger person you have become will choose from wisdom instead of longing. This is where the story becomes bigger than reunion. It becomes a question of identity. Can you hear someone's truth without abandoning your own? Can you open a door without surrendering the boundaries that helped you heal? The watchman in the story turns from the horizon and says, "The greatest news is not that someone is returning. The greatest news is that you are no longer the person they left behind." And then, just as dawn begins to break, a message appears. It is longer than you expected. The first sentence is not an apology. It is a confession. And hidden near the end is a revelation about why they truly disappeared, a reason connected to another person, a private promise, and a decision made on your behalf without your knowledge. But the most shocking part is not what they did. It is what they are preparing to do next. The message remained unopened for several minutes. Not because you did not see it, but because something inside you understood that once those words entered your heart, the quiet life you had carefully rebuilt would never feel quite the same again. Outside, the evening settled gently across the sky, painting the horizon with fading gold and deep blue. It was the kind of peaceful moment that often arrives before life quietly changes direction. When you finally gathered the courage to read the first lines, they were unlike anything you expected. "I owe you the truth not because I expect forgiveness, but because I can no longer live with silence." Every sentence carried the weight of someone who had spent countless nights replaying memories they could never rewrite. There were no dramatic excuses. No attempt to make themselves the victim. Instead, they admitted that the greatest battle had never been with circumstances around them, it had been with the fear that they were not enough to stand beside the future they imagined with you. As the words unfolded, another hidden chapter came into view. Long before the distance appeared between you, someone close to them had quietly planted seeds of doubt. Every hopeful step they wanted to take toward you was met with another warning, another fearful opinion, another reason to wait. At first they believed those voices were protecting them. Over time they realized those voices were only protecting comfort, never truth. That realization arrived too late. Or at least that is what they believed. One evening, while sorting through forgotten belongings, they found something that instantly transported them back to the happiest season of your connection. It was small enough to fit in one hand, yet powerful enough to silence every excuse they had repeated to themselves for so long. As they held it, memories returned with astonishing clarity, the sound of laughter they had tried to forget, conversations that once filled ordinary days with extraordinary meaning, and promises that had never truly disappeared, only become buried beneath regret. That single discovery forced an impossible question into the center of their heart. What if the future I gave up is still waiting? The answer did not arrive immediately. Instead, life began placing unexpected reminders in front of them. Familiar songs appeared without explanation. Places they had avoided suddenly became impossible to ignore. Even strangers spoke words that echoed thoughts they had never shared aloud. Whether coincidence or simply the way memory works, every moment seemed to point toward the same unfinished story. Meanwhile, something equally important was happening within you. Without realizing it, you had stopped defining yourself by unanswered questions. The seasons of uncertainty had quietly strengthened your spirit. You no longer searched every day for signs. You no longer measured your worth by someone else's ability to recognize it. The peace you had slowly cultivated became something no one else could give and no one else could take away. That inner transformation mattered more than you knew. Because the person preparing to return was not searching for the version of you they remembered. They were about to meet someone wiser, calmer, and far more grounded than the one they left behind. For the first time, the balance had shifted. They were the uncertain one now. Days later, they stood in a familiar place where they once imagined your future together. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the quiet sounds of evening. They closed their eyes and whispered words they wished they had spoken years earlier. If another chance exists, I won't waste it. It was not a promise made to change your mind. It was a promise made to change themselves. At that very moment, another unexpected piece of the story emerged. The person who had once encouraged them to walk away finally confessed something that had remained hidden all along. They admitted their advice had never come from wisdom, it had come from their own fear of watching someone else experience the kind of happiness they had lost themselves. The confession landed like thunder in complete silence. Suddenly, years of confusion began fitting together. Conversations that never made sense finally had context. Decisions that once felt random revealed hidden motives. The truth was painful, but it also brought freedom. Blame no longer held the same power once everything stood in the light. Yet even after learning this, they hesitated. Because they understood something that frightened them more than rejection. They understood that healing changes people. Would the person you had become even recognize the love they were finally ready to offer? With that question burning in their heart, they reached for their phone one final time. This time, there was no hesitation. A date was chosen. A place was selected. A message was carefully written, not asking for another beginning, but asking for one honest conversation. Their finger rested above the send button. Then their eyes widened. A new notification had appeared first. It carried information neither of you expected, and within seconds, everything they believed about your shared future was turned upside down. The decision that had taken years to make would now have to be made before time slipped away once again. The notification interrupted everything. It wasn't loud or dramatic. Just a quiet vibration against the palm of a trembling hand. Yet in that single instant, the carefully planned message waiting to be sent suddenly felt insignificant compared to what had just appeared on the screen. The words were brief, almost ordinary, but they carried a weight that seemed impossible to ignore. There is something you deserve to know before it's too late. No explanation followed. Only an address, and a time. For several long moments, they simply stared, wondering who could have sent it. The name attached to the message belonged to someone they had not spoken to in years, a person who had witnessed the beginning of your story but disappeared before everything unraveled. There had never been anger between them, only distance. Which made the sudden reappearance even more unsettling. As the evening faded into night, curiosity overcame hesitation. They drove through quiet streets where familiar buildings seemed strangely different, as though memory had painted them brighter than reality ever had. Every traffic light felt longer than usual. Every turn carried the feeling that invisible threads were pulling them toward something already written long before this night began. The address led to a small cafe tucked away on a peaceful corner. It was nearly empty except for one figure seated beside a window, gently tracing circles around a warm cup of coffee that had long since grown cold. When their eyes met, neither person smiled. Some conversations begin with greetings. This one began with silence. Finally, the older friend spoke. "I've waited a long time to tell you this because I believed the truth would only create more pain. But hiding it created something even worse." The room seemed to grow quieter. "You thought you walked away because life became too complicated. But you were never given the full picture." Every word that followed peeled back another layer of a past built on misunderstandings rather than certainty. Decisions had been made without your knowledge. Messages had never reached their destination. Moments that looked like rejection had often been moments of confusion created by circumstances neither of you fully understood. None of it erased the choices that followed. But it changed the meaning behind them. Across town, completely unaware of this conversation, you found yourself unable to sleep. The house rested in perfect stillness, yet your heart refused to follow. You stepped outside into the cool night air, where countless stars shimmered above like tiny lanterns scattered across velvet skies. Something inside you whispered that change was close. Not because of fear. Because hope had quietly returned without asking permission. You couldn't explain why. There was no evidence. No message. No promise. Only an unexpected peace settling over your spirit like the first gentle breeze after an impossibly long summer. Back inside the cafe, the final piece of the hidden story emerged. There was one letter, the friend admitted softly. A letter? It was written for you, but it was never delivered. The world seemed to stop. According to the friend, the letter had been written during the exact season when everything appeared to fall apart. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. A confession of love spoken without conditions. A confession of fear that had finally surrendered to courage. And somehow, it vanished before it ever reached your hands. For years, both of you unknowingly built new lives around a silence that should never have existed. Neither of you realized that one missing letter had altered the course of two hearts. The friend reached into an old leather satchel resting beside the chair. Inside rested a weathered envelope, its edges softened by time. The handwriting across the front remained unmistakably familiar. Your name. Carefully written. Untouched. Unread. The person across the table reached forward with shaking hands, but before the envelope could be opened, the cafe door slowly swung inward. A stranger stepped inside, glanced directly at the envelope, and quietly spoke words that drained every trace of color from the room. "Don't read that here." The silence that followed carried a mystery even deeper than the letter itself, and whatever waited beyond those next few moments would change every assumption either of you still believed about the past. The stranger did not rush toward the table. Instead, they paused just inside the doorway, allowing the quiet hum of the cafe to settle once more. Their expression held neither alarm nor hostility. It carried the calm certainty of someone who had spent years carrying a burden they never intended to keep. "You've waited this long," the stranger said softly. "Please don't let your first glimpse of the truth happen without understanding what came before it." The room seemed to shrink around those words. No one spoke. Even the friend who had guarded the envelope lowered their eyes, as though they had expected this moment but secretly hoped it would never arrive. The stranger slowly removed an old journal from a worn canvas bag. Its faded cover showed the marks of countless journeys, its pages swollen from time. They laid it gently beside the unopened envelope. "This belongs to someone who believed they were protecting both of you," they explained. After everything happened, they couldn't bring themselves to destroy it, but they couldn't bear to deliver it either. Inside the journal were dated entries written across several difficult months. Each page revealed a different perspective on events that had once appeared simple. What seemed like deliberate distance had often been painful hesitation. What looked like indifference had sometimes been quiet sacrifice. The truth was not clean enough to create heroes or villains. It was simply human, filled with fear, imperfect choices, and hearts trying to protect one another while unintentionally causing deeper wounds. As those pages turned, another realization slowly emerged. The people surrounding your story had not acted out of cruelty alone. Many had been carrying invisible fears inherited from their own disappointments. They believed they were preventing heartbreak because heartbreak was all they had ever known. Without realizing it, they passed their own unfinished stories into someone else's future. Miles away, your own evening unfolded with unexpected clarity. You found yourself opening a forgotten box tucked high inside a closet. You had not searched for it. Your hands seemed to know exactly where to look. Beneath old photographs and handwritten notes rested a small keepsake you had almost forgotten existed. As you held it, a memory surfaced with astonishing detail. There had been one afternoon when everything felt possible. You remembered sunlight reflecting across the pavement, laughter arriving so naturally that neither of you imagined it could ever disappear. Just before parting ways that day, they had started to say something important. Then someone interrupted. The conversation never resumed. For years, you believed the unfinished sentence no longer mattered. Now you wondered if those unspoken words had been waiting all this time. Back at the cafe, the journal reached its final pages. The handwriting changed. It became hurried, almost trembling. One entry stood apart from all the others. "If this reaches either of them someday, tell them I finally learned that protecting people by hiding the truth only creates another kind of pain. If I had trusted honesty sooner, two hearts might have found each other before life became so complicated." No signature appeared beneath those words. Only a date. It matched the exact morning everything between you had quietly fallen apart. The stranger closed the journal with gentle care. "The person who wrote this asked me to keep one promise," they whispered. "They said there would come a day when both of you were finally strong enough to hear the complete story instead of only the parts that hurt." For the first time, the unopened envelope no longer felt like the greatest mystery. Something larger was beginning to take shape. It wasn't simply about recovering what had been lost. It was about discovering that hope had been quietly preserved through years of silence by people who believed redemption was still possible. The stranger finally slid the envelope across the table. "You may open it now." Hands reached forward. The seal slowly broke. Inside rested several neatly folded pages, but before anyone unfolded the first sheet, something unexpected slipped free and landed on the table. It wasn't another letter. It was a photograph. The image captured a moment neither of you remembered ever being photographed together. On the back, written in the same familiar handwriting, were just 8 simple words. When the time is right, meet me where this began. Beneath the message was a location. Tomorrow. At sunrise. No one in the cafe knew who had arranged it. No one could explain how that photograph had remained hidden for so many years. But one thing had become unmistakably clear. Someone had been waiting for this reunion far longer than either of you had ever imagined, and sunrise was about to reveal the first face behind the mystery. Before dawn had fully awakened the sky, the world seemed to hold its breath. Mist drifted across the quiet landscape, softening every outline until the familiar appeared almost dreamlike. The destination written on the back of the photograph led to a place untouched by the noise of ordinary life, a gentle overlook where the first light of morning always arrived a few moments earlier than anywhere else nearby. It was the same place where countless hopes had once been spoken without realizing how precious they would become. Step by step, the silence grew heavier, not with fear but with expectation. Every sound felt magnified. The rustle of leaves. The distant call of birds greeting the sunrise. Even the rhythm of a heartbeat seemed louder than the breeze moving through the trees. Questions filled every thought, yet none of them mattered as much as the feeling that this morning had been quietly approaching for years. Then another figure appeared at the opposite end of the path. For a long moment, neither of you moved. Distance separated you by only a few yards, yet it seemed to contain every unanswered season, every unfinished conversation, every quiet hope that had survived despite everything. Neither face looked exactly as memory had preserved it. Time had written its own gentle story across both lives. There was more wisdom now. More humility. More quiet strength. The first words were unexpectedly simple. Thank you, for coming. Nothing about the greeting tried to erase the past. It honored it. The silence that followed no longer felt empty. It became a bridge, allowing both hearts to arrive before either voice tried to explain what years alone never could. A small wooden box rested in their hands. I almost threw this away, they admitted. Not because it meant nothing, but because it meant too much. Carefully, they opened the lid. Inside were reminders of ordinary moments that had somehow become extraordinary, a faded ticket from an afternoon spent laughing without purpose, a pressed flower saved from a forgotten walk, a handwritten note containing only a single sentence that had once seemed too ordinary to treasure. I couldn't let go, they whispered. I only pretended I had. The confession carried no dramatic flourish. It was gentle, almost fragile, and because of that, it felt completely real. As the conversation unfolded, another hidden truth quietly emerged. During the years apart, there had been more than one opportunity to reconnect. Circumstances had brought your paths astonishingly close on several occasions. Once in a crowded bookstore. Another time at an airport only minutes apart. Even at a community gathering where each of you had stood on opposite sides of the same room without ever realizing it. Looking back, those moments no longer felt like cruel coincidences. They felt like reminders that some stories refuse to disappear, even when life keeps postponing the next chapter. The rising sun gradually painted the horizon with warm shades of amber and gold. Its light revealed something remarkable. The person standing before you no longer spoke about changing the past. Instead, they spoke about becoming someone worthy of whatever future remained. I stopped asking whether I deserved another chance, they said quietly. The better question became whether I was finally willing to live with complete honesty, no matter what answer I received. Those words settled into the morning air with unexpected peace. There was no pressure hidden inside them. Only sincerity. Only respect. Only the quiet courage to let truth exist without controlling its outcome. Just as the conversation reached its most heartfelt moment, footsteps echoed behind you. Both of you turned. An elderly woman slowly approached the overlook, carrying a weathered envelope tied with a pale ribbon. Her smile held the warmth of someone recognizing a scene she had imagined many times before. "I've been hoping this day would arrive," she said softly. Neither of you recognized her. Yet somehow she seemed to know both of your names. She explained that many years earlier, someone had entrusted her with one final responsibility. If these two hearts ever found the courage to stand in the same place again, the instructions had said, give them this only after they have spoken honestly to one another. With gentle hands, she offered the envelope. Unlike every message before it, this one bore no date. Only a single handwritten sentence across the front. The last truth was never meant to separate you, it was meant to reveal who quietly loved you enough to protect your future. Neither of you reached for it immediately. Because somewhere deep inside, both of you sensed that whatever waited inside those pages would not simply answer old questions. It would completely reshape everything you believed about how this story had truly begun, and why someone had spent all these years guiding both of your lives toward this exact sunrise.